Snow dusted the edges of the Imperial Regency Hall like icing on a towering glass cake, its golden doors opening to spill warmth, champagne, and the kind of laughter that echoed off polished marble, like coins dropping into a deep well inside. Chandeliers glistened like frozen fire above the ballroom, their crystals catching every flicker of candlelight, every flash of a diamond bracelet raised in careless toasts. Music from a live string quartet curled softly through the air like perfume, the scent of roses, expensive cologne, and something colder competition hung beneath it all. Emily Rose Bennett stood behind a velvet curtain just beyond the main hall. Tucked into the corner of the coat check room, her black uniform was neatly pressed, her dark brown hair swept into a low bun to hide the scar that crept from her collarbone to her jawline. She adjusted her name tag again, even though no one would read it. They never did. Her job was to collect coats, offer polite smiles, and disappear into the wallpaper of Manhattan's elite. She watched them through a narrow gap in the curtain, the women in shimmering gowns that caught the light like glass, the men with chiseled jaws and watches that cost more than she earned in a year. Emily wasn't envious, not really, but she studied them the way a botanist might examine a poisonous flower. How they moved in clusters, how they looked past the servers like they were furniture. The charity gala was for burn victims, ironically enough, not that anyone cared. The fundraiser was just an excuse to pose for pictures. Emily was here for the extra cash. Every shift she picked up brought her a little closer to her goal, a mobile clinic that would bring treatment and counseling to people like her, those scarred not just in skin, but in silence. She'd seen what it meant to be dismissed as damaged, to be glanced at then looked away from. She would build something that did the opposite, something that saw people, but no one saw her, until Clarissa Wynne did. The socialite shimmered in silver and cruelty, her laughter carrying across the ballroom, like breaking glass. She was Manhattan royalty. Her father owned 3 skyscrapers and a private island, and she wore disdain like it was silk, flanked by 2 women dressed in matching pastel gowns. Clarissa's green eyes flicked toward the coat check and landed on Emily. Clarissa whispered something. Her friends turned, then giggled behind jeweled hands. Emily looked down quickly, pretending to organize the coats. "Oh my God," Clarissa drawled, her heels clicking as she approached. "Did you see her face? Poor thing, looks like she tripped and fell into a bonfire." Emily's stomach tightened. She'd heard worse, much worse. But the way the women laughed, their perfect teeth bared like wolves, chilled her more than the December air outside. "We should totally invite her out for drinks," one of them mocked. "Oh wait, do coat girls get breaks?" "I have a better idea," Clarissa said, her voice silk and venom. She turned back to the ballroom with a smirk forming on her lips, the kind that promised entertainment at someone else's expense. "Let's give our little phoenix her moment in the spotlight." And just like that, the shadows Emily had hidden in all night began to disappear, pulled back by hands that didn't care who she was, only that she bled when mocked. The moment Clarissa Wynne turned back toward the ballroom with that gleam in her eye, something shifted in the air like the temperature had dropped without warning. Emily felt it in her bones before she understood what was happening. She heard whispers, the click of heels, and then Clarissa's unmistakable voice rising above the string quartet like a siren's call. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clarissa cooed from the edge of the dance floor, her champagne glass raised high, "I'd like to introduce you all to someone very special tonight, someone who's been hiding right under our noses." Emily froze, fingers clenched tightly around a wool overcoat she hadn't yet returned to its owner. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her legs felt rooted to the marble floor. She peeked from behind the curtain. Clarissa's arm gestured toward her, like she was presenting a prize pony. "You there," Clarissa said sweetly, locking eyes with Emily across the glittering hall. "Come, don't be shy." Emily didn't move, not until the Mactor D, eyes apologetic, appeared at her side and whispered, "They're calling for you. I'm sorry. Just go along." It's Clarissa Wynne. The unspoken rule: when someone with power commands, you obey even if it tears you apart. She stepped forward, a single server walking into the lion's den. The room quieted slightly, curiosity stirring among the elite. She could feel their eyes like heat lamps on her skin. They didn't know who she was. That was the point. Clarissa smiled wider with every step Emily took. Isn't she lovely? Clarissa said as Emily reached the center of the room. Ladies, look at this gown. Thrift store chic, am I right? Laughter followed, crisp and poisonous. Emily didn't speak. She couldn't, you see. Clarissa continued, circling her like a cat. I noticed her earlier, and I thought, why shouldn't everyone else get a chance to meet the woman behind the curtain? Gasps and stifled giggles spread as Clarissa reached up and swept Emily's bun aside, exposing the scar that curved along her neck like lightning frozen in flesh. The cameras flashed instantly. Oh, Clarissa said, fake pouting. Did I ruin the illusion? Emily's cheeks flamed, but she didn't cry, not in front of them. Her throat tightened, but she kept her back straight. Her silence was her armor now. Then a different sound broke the quiet, a low murmur that rippled through the crowd. Like a sudden change in the wind, the ballroom doors had opened again. And this time, the man who walked in didn't smile, didn't speak. Alexander Drake Marshall had arrived. He was tall, dressed in a black tailored suit, his expression unreadable, his gray eyes like storm clouds carved in ice. The crowd split instinctively, people stepping back as if unsure whether to bow or run. His reputation preceded him: reclusive, brilliant, dangerous. The kind of man who built empires without blinking and destroyed competitors with a word. Clarissa turned to greet him, already adjusting her expression into something sweeter, more seductive. But Alexander didn't look at her. His eyes had locked onto Emily. He walked past everyone, ignoring outstretched hands, ignoring Clarissa's practiced charm, and stopped directly in front of the woman with the scar. What's your name? He asked, his voice quiet but firm. Emily blinked, confused. Breath caught in her throat. Emily, she whispered. He held her gaze for a moment that felt like gravity itself had shifted. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took her hand, turned toward the crowd, and said in a voice that froze time, "This woman is my wife." A gasp swept through the ballroom like a lightning strike. Someone choked on champagne. Clarissa's mouth fell open, her smile shattering like porcelain. Emily couldn't move, couldn't think. Her heart wasn't just pounding, it was in free fall. Alexander's hand around hers felt solid, warm, real, and completely impossible. A man she had never met had just claimed her as his wife in front of New York's most powerful people. And no one knew why. That's not funny, Alexander, Clarissa stammered, trying to laugh. We all know she's just a... He turned his head slowly, gray eyes icy. Say it, I dare you. Clarissa's face twisted, but she said nothing. Alexander leaned in, just enough that only Emily could hear. Play along, he said. Trust me. And somehow, despite the chaos, the lights, the stares, she did. He guided her gently but firmly toward the exit. The room remained frozen. The whispers would come later, the articles, the speculations, the public storm. But for now, Emily let herself be led away by the richest man in the room, a man who had just rewritten the script of her life with a single sentence. And she had no idea what kind of story she had just stepped into. The doors of the Imperial Regency Hall closed behind them with a soft but decisive thud, muffling the murmur of stunned voices still rippling through the ballroom. Outside the marble foyer, the world felt colder, quieter and eerie calm after the storm. Snow fell gently in the courtyard beyond the tall glass walls, but inside, Emily could feel the heat of adrenaline pulsing beneath her skin. She yanked her hand away. What the hell was that? Her voice was sharp now, stronger than she expected it to be. You don't know me. You just told a room full of billionaires and VIP guests that I'm your wife. Alexander Drake Marshall didn't flinch. He stood there, perfectly composed, like a man used to chaos bowing at his feet. I know exactly what I said, he replied, voice even. I also know exactly what they were about to do to you, and I won't be a spectator to that kind of cruelty. You could have stopped her without that. I could have, he said simply, but they wouldn't have listened, not really. Not until someone they feared made them stop. It had to be me. Emily shook her head. Why me? You could have pulled any woman from the room, made some story up. Why me? His eyes didn't leave hers. Because they were laughing at you. Because I've seen that look before. And because you didn't break. A heavy silence fell between them. Alexander stepped toward the elevator, then paused, waiting. She didn't follow. "You're not coming?" he asked. "Coming where?" "Home. You're my wife now, remember?" There was a flicker of irony in his tone, but only just. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Emily snapped. "This isn't some fantasy. I have a life. I have a job. I have a dream," he interrupted. Her heart stalled. He nodded toward the tall glass doors, where the snow lit the street in silver. A mobile burn clinic, converted transit buses, 3 grant applications, all denied. "You've been trying to fund it for years," quietly, humbly, "and they just laughed at you." Emily stepped back. "How do you know that?" He exhaled slowly. "I've seen your file." "You what?" "I saw you 3 weeks ago," Alexander admitted, eyes never leaving her. "You were working a different event. You were checking coats, barely speaking, but you helped a girl who spilled wine on her dress in the restroom. You gave her your scarf. You didn't know she was the daughter of a senator. You didn't ask. You just helped, and I noticed." Emily stared at him. This was beyond anything she could process. Her mind fought to stitch the narrative back together, but it wouldn't hold. "So you ran a background check. I call it research," he said quietly. "You're insane." "Probably," he said, "but the board of my company, Marshall Systems, is forcing a merger I don't want, and they want me to marry someone with the right pedigree to make it happen." "Let me guess," she said flatly. "Clarissa Wynne." "Bingo." Alexander stepped closer. He lowered his voice. "I'd rather start a war than marry her. And tonight gave me a different option, a real one." Emily folded her arms, her scar now fully visible under the soft yellow lighting. "I'm not going to be your fake bride just to help you avoid a corporate marriage." "What if I help you build the clinic?" he asked. She hesitated. "Full funding, top-tier staff, legal protection for community outreach, your rules, your vision. In exchange for what?" "A 1-year arrangement, public appearances, charity, events, family functions. We act the part. Then, clean break." "What happens after a year?" "You walk away with your dream funded, and I walk away without having to sell my life to Clarissa." Emily looked out through the window again. The snow had started to fall heavier, blanketing the city in quiet white. It felt surreal, like the whole world was holding its breath. "You're asking me to lie to the world," she said softly. Double quotes, "Yes," he answered, without apology. "But not to yourself, and not to me. This only works if we're honest completely." Emily turned away, eyes tracing the faint frost patterns on the window. Her pulse still hadn't slowed. 1 year, 12 months, and when it ends, you keep everything. She closed her eyes. She saw Clarissa's sneer, the laughter, the camera, flash, the scar. All the times she'd been invisible, rejected, ignored. And then this man. This impossible man with steel in his voice and winter in his eyes, who had just rewired the course of her life. In front of hundreds of people. She turned back to him. Double quotes, "Fine. But you play by my rules." "Done," he said, without hesitation, "and we write it all down. Every condition, no surprises. James is already drawing up the contract." "Of course he is," she muttered. As he held out his hand, she hesitated, then took it. And somewhere above them, the Imperial Ballroom buzzed with rumors and chaos. But down here, in the quiet hush of winter's breath, and a deal born from defiance, a new story had begun. One that neither of them could control. One that no one saw coming. The penthouse didn't look like a home. It looked like power polished, cold and calculated. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the massive living room like a cage made of glass and steel. The city sprawled beneath them, glittering in the distance, like a galaxy had fallen and settled over Manhattan. Emily stepped inside slowly, still wrapped in her borrowed silence. Her heels clicked against marble floors that gleamed like ice. She'd been given a keycard at the door. A driver had brought her here. And now, this. A life that wasn't hers. A name that didn't belong to her. A lie that had caught fire in the public eye before she could even catch her breath. She wasn't ready for what waited inside. "You're here," Alexander said simply, appearing from around the corner, a black turtleneck rolled up at the sleeves, a crystal glass of scotch in his hand. Not a hair out of place, not a single emotion on his face. "Barely," she answered. He gestured toward the sofa without insisting. We'll keep it simple tonight. We talk. We draw lines. Tomorrow we make it real. Make what real? She said, sinking into the edge of the velvet couch. The marriage or the circus? He didn't flinch. Both. He sat across from her, his posture effortless, like someone used to being in control. Too used to it. We'll announce a private wedding took place last month, he said, in Switzerland. The press will run with it. They always do. Won't your family know that's a lie? His jaw twitched slightly. They won't be surprised. They know I don't let people into my life. They'll assume I did it in secret just to spite them. She looked at him, really looked this time. Beneath the sculpted surface and precise movements was a man who had built walls so high around himself, even he seemed lost inside them. Why do they expect you to marry Clarissa? She asked. He exhaled through his nose. Clarissa's family is old money. Mine is new. They think a union would legitimize what we built. 2 names. 1 empire. Neat. Efficient. Hollow. Emily leaned forward. And you think I'm a better option? I don't need a better option, he said, eyes locked with hers. I need a real person. The words landed hard. Harder than she expected. What happens when people start asking questions? She whispered, when they look into me, into my past. I've already prepared a dossier, he said. She glared. You mean another background check, a protection measure? He replied, too calmly. There's nothing they can use against you now. Not anymore. Emily stood, her voice rising. You think that makes it okay? To dig through my life, control the story, script my words. I don't want to control you, Emily, he said, standing to, his tone colder now. I want to protect this arrangement. If that means keeping vultures from tearing you apart, I'll do it. But what if I don't want your protection? She snapped. Silence pulsed between them. The city flickered behind him like a warning light. Alexander's gaze dropped. For the first time, something in him shifted. Then tell me to stop, he said, quieter. And I will. Emily looked away. She didn't tell him to stop. That night, she was shown to a guest suite bigger than her entire apartment. There were clothes waiting for her, designer labels with tags still on, custom-sized. A contract lay on the bedside table, printed on heavy cream paper. Black ink, gold trim, no love. No promises, just signatures. She didn't sign it. Not yet. The next morning brought chaos. The tabloids exploded. Billionaire mystery bride revealed. Waitress turned wife. A scar and a secret. Social media surged with her photo. Some posts called her a gold digger. Others called her a hero. Someone posted a video of Clarissa pulling back her hair at the gala. The comments burned. What kind of man marries that? Scarred and scheming, perfect for him. New York's Beauty and the Beast. Emily sat frozen at the dining table as she read, unable to stop scrolling. Alexander walked in mid-scroll, carrying a folder in one hand and his phone in the other. Don't read that, he said sharply. Too late. He tossed the folder down. Focus on this instead. Legal rights, asset protection, medical insurance for your clinic, and a clause about defamation lawsuits should you choose to. File 1. You've thought of everything. I don't let people walk into fire without a shield. She looked up. And what if the fire comes from you? He paused, as if the question caught him somewhere he didn't want to be touched. Then, you burn me back, he said. That afternoon, Emily signed the contract. By evening, they made their first public appearance, an art exhibit hosted by the mayor's wife. She wore a navy silk gown and the same expression she had in the coat check. Calm, unreadable, unbreakable. Alexander held her hand with a grip firm but not possessive. Reporters swarmed like wasps. Photos were taken. Questions shouted. And somewhere in the corner, Clarissa watched with a glass of wine and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. Emily caught her eye, and for the first time, smiled back, not with cruelty, but with warning. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rain started as a whisper on the penthouse windows, then turned violent, pelting the glass in a rhythmic fury as the city blurred beyond the skyline. Lightning lit up the clouds like war drums overhead, and thunder followed seconds later. Deep and guttural, somewhere in the distance, car alarms shrieked. The storm was breaking over Manhattan. But inside the glass fortress that Emily now called home, the real storm was just beginning. She stood in the hallway, barefoot in silk, holding the envelope that had been slipped under her door. No return name, no note, just her name written in careful, slanted script. Inside, a single photo and a check. $5 million. The photo was from her first day working, coat check at the Imperial Hall. 2 years ago, her hunched posture, the oversized sweater, the scar half visible behind a falling strand of hair. The check was signed by Clarissa Wynne. Emily stared at it, unmoving, not because she didn't understand what it meant, but because she did. There was no need for words. This was war. She walked straight to Alexander's study, where he was finishing a call, his voice low and clipped, eyes scanning blueprints across his desk. He looked up the moment she entered and immediately knew something was wrong. Who sent that? He asked. She tossed the photo and check onto his desk. Clarissa. He leaned back slowly, picked up the photo with 2 fingers. Didn't blink. She's escalating. And you're just going to let her? Emily asked. I'm already handling it. How? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded the photo and set it aflame in a silver ashtray by his elbow. The flames curled up and blackened the edges until only ashes remained. That's not handling it, she said. Then what is it? He asked calmly. Retaliation, public scandal, a counteroffer. I want to face her. He blinked. You what? Face her? On my terms. He stood. Emily, this isn't high school. She isn't going to back down because you confront her. She's trying to erase me, Emily said, her voice rising. With money, with shame, she thinks she still controls the story. Well, she doesn't, not anymore. Alexander studied her, the scar no longer hidden, her spine straight, voice steady. Not the girl behind the curtain anymore. The storm outside rattled the windows, but neither of them flinched. The next day, Clarissa arrived at the Marshall Tower under the guise of business. Alexander had arranged the meeting, but he said nothing about Emily being present. When Clarissa entered the sleek boardroom, all white, leather and steel, she paused just long enough to notice Emily sitting at the head of the table. Well, Clarissa purred, aren't you playing dress up again? Emily smiled coldly. I wanted to thank you. Clarissa's eyes narrowed. For what? For reminding me who I am and who I'm not. Clarissa crossed her arms. Let me guess. This is where you tell me you're not going to be bought. Off. No, Emily said softly. This is where I tell you I know what you've done. Clarissa stiffened just slightly. Your family's business is under federal investigation, isn't it? Emily continued, her tone unshakably calm. Illegal contracts, political bribes, 3 shell companies registered under your cousin's name. You don't know what you're talking about, but Alexander does, and now so do I. Clarissa glanced toward Alexander, who stood in the corner, silent and unreadable. You used me to bait him, Emily said, rising to her feet. And when that didn't work, you tried to erase me. But I'm still here, and you're running out of moves. Clarissa's mask cracked, then just a fracture, but enough. The fury in her green eyes was no longer elegant. You think this little performance makes you untouchable? No, Emily said, but it makes me unafraid. And for Clarissa Wynne, that was far worse. After Clarissa stormed out, Alexander closed the door quietly behind her and turned to Emily. You scared her. Good. He stepped closer, something raw flickering behind his eyes. You didn't just stand up to her, he said. You beat her at her own game. That was never the goal, Emily whispered. Then what was? She looked at him, and for a moment, all the games, all the lies, all the headlines melted away. To stop being someone people pity, to stop hiding, to stop waiting for someone to save me. A silence passed between them, not empty, heavy with something neither had named yet. Alexander reached out slowly, like a man crossing into forbidden territory. He touched her scar, not with hesitation or apology, but with reverence. I see you, he said. Do you? She whispered. His voice dropped. I see the fire you walked through, the one you never asked for, and the one you lit tonight. A beat, then another. You still want this to be temporary? He asked softly. Don't you? She countered. He didn't answer. Neither did she. Outside, the storm began to fade, But inside, something far more dangerous was beginning to burn. The headlines changed overnight, not because a press release had been sent or a new scandal had been staged. It was something else, something the media couldn't quite name but couldn't look away from either. The scarred wife who silenced Manhattan's queen. Emily Marshall, from courtroom to corner office. Clarissa Wynn storms out of Marshall Tower in tears. Insider claims power shift is underway, but Emily wasn't. Celebrating. Not yet. Because power, she'd learned, didn't come from headlines. It came from silence, from secrets, and the silence between her and Alexander had started to grow loud again. He'd become distant in the days since their confrontation with Clarissa. He still appeared beside her at public events, still reached for her hand when the flashes went off, still kissed her temple when someone was watching. But when they were alone, his office door stayed closed. Their conversations were brief. His eyes never lingered. Something was wrong, and she didn't know what. One night, after another long gala, Emily returned to the penthouse alone. Alexander had stayed behind to speak with a senator, or so his assistant claimed. She kicked off her heels, peeled off the sapphire gown that had been tailored to perfection, and stood barefoot on the cold marble floor, staring at the skyline. She should have felt powerful, vindicated, safe, but something inside her felt hollow. A knock echoed through the hallway. Emily expected James, or perhaps a delivery from the security team. But when she opened the door, it was neither. It was an old man with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a black cane. "Mrs. Marshall?" he asked, voice cool and refined. "Yes, I'm Gregor Lang. I was the lead architect on the Westbrook development project before your husband shut it down." Emily frowned. "The low-income housing redevelopment." He nodded. "I thought you might want to see this." He handed her a folder. Old plans, financial models, eviction notices, and then something else. A document bearing her name, dated 6 months before she ever met Alexander. Subject: Emily Rose Bennett. Project designation: variable pressure asset recommended leverage. Community alignment plus emotional optic potential. Emily's heart stopped. Beneath it were notes: behavioral analysis, photographs, timelines, likely to respond to injustice, emotionally authentic, controllable if emotionally invested, ideal public face for narrative correction. Her hands began to shake. It wasn't a marriage proposal. It had never been a rescue. It was a strategy, and she was the variable. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "Mr. Marshall doesn't know I kept it," Gregor said. "He scrapped the project, but I think it's time you knew how it started. I think you deserve the truth." Emily closed the door slowly, her mind spinning. She couldn't breathe. The next morning, she said nothing. She dressed in silence, attended a charity luncheon with Alexander, smiled at donors, touched his arm like nothing had changed. But inside, she was breaking. That night, she waited until he was alone by the window, staring down at the city he thought he owned. "How long?" she asked. He turned, confused. "How long what?" "How long were you watching me before that night at the gala?" His face shifted, barely, but she saw it. "Emily, don't lie," he exhaled slowly. "I had my team identify someone suitable, someone who could help shift public focus, someone who would balance me." She laughed, sharp and cold. "Balance you? You mean soften your image, clean your reputation?" "I ended the project," he said quietly. "I chose you." "No," she snapped. "You calculated me." He stepped closer. "It stopped being about that. It changed. I changed. You used my scars," she whispered, eyes brimming with tears. "You turned my pain into a pitch, and you made me believe it was love." "It is now," he said. "I swear to you." "Then why didn't you tell me the truth?" He didn't answer. "You built an empire of secrets, Alexander, and I walked right into it." She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist, not hard, not forcefully, just enough to stop her from disappearing. "Don't walk away," he said, voice low, cracked. "Don't let this end like that." "How else should it end? With a choice?" He whispered. "Not a contract, not a performance, just you and me, without the lie." She pulled her hand away. "You don't get to ask for that now." She packed her things. Left behind the gowns, the keys, the marble and gold. But not the scar. That she would carry. The next 3 weeks passed without contact. Emily launched the first phase of the mobile clinic alone. Her face still graced the magazines, but the articles now shifted from curiosity to admiration. Not because of her marriage, but because of her work. She was no longer a ghost. She had become her own story. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. I broke it before it had the chance to become real. But if you'll let me, I'll rebuild it from the ground up. Truth only. No contracts, no cameras, no lies. Just one man asking one woman to come home. Alexander Emily folded the letter carefully. Outside, the sky was gray. Inside, she felt something warm flicker in the ashes. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe something close. And for the first time, since the curtain rose at that gala months ago, she was the one holding the spotlight. The storm had long since passed over Manhattan, but inside the marble halls of the Marshall Empire, its damage lingered like smoke, silent, invisible, inescapable. The headlines had shifted again, now quieting into curiosity rather than scandal. The public wanted to know why Emily Rose Marshall had disappeared. The papers asked, was it a failed fairy tale, a Cinderella who woke up? But Emily didn't answer. She had returned to Brooklyn, to the same community center where she used to teach. Our 2 children whose names no one else remembered. She traded ballrooms for classrooms, silk gowns for jeans, and paint-streaked aprons. And while cameras still followed her at times, she refused interviews. Every question about Alexander received the same reply, no comment. Because some wounds heal quietly, and some truths take time to forgive. But the world didn't wait. One morning, 2 months after she left the penthouse, she found a note taped to the mobile clinic's windshield. It wasn't handwritten like his last one. It was typed, clinical, almost businesslike, but the words struck her harder than any bouquet or apology ever could. Open tomorrow's stockholder address, 11 a.m. Marshall Tower, main auditorium. If nothing else, come for the last lie I'll ever tell. She stared at it for a long time. Then, against her better judgment, she went. The Marshall Tower rose into the clouds like a judgmental cathedral, glass and steel catching the morning light with surgical precision. Emily entered through a private entrance. No media, no guards, no fanfare. Just a single elevator ride up to the 39th floor, where the auditorium buzzed with wealthy investors, high-powered board members, and strategic partners, all waiting for Alexander Drake Marshall to take the stage and assure them the company was still his. He appeared like thunder without sound. Black suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. His hair longer now, his jaw shadowed, but his presence just as sharp. The room silenced the moment he stepped into the spotlight. Emily sat in the back, half hidden, her coat draped across her lap. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander began, his voice crisp, steady. I called this meeting to announce something unexpected and something permanent. The air shifted. Investors leaned forward. Pens hovered over notepads. Alexander's gaze swept the room, then landed only for a flicker on her. You know me as the architect of systems, he said. The man who designs data and revenue models the way a sculptor shapes stone. But 2 months ago, someone showed me that architecture built without compassion eventually collapses. He pressed a button. The screen behind him came to life. Photos appeared, not of graphs or company metrics, but of people. Kids smiling in a mobile clinic, burned survivors sketching their recovery stories in color, nurses teaching patients to love their reflections again. This is where my fortune is going, he said. 51% of Marshall Systems has been signed into a trust, not to expand, not to dominate, but to fund restoration. A rustle of shock moved through the room. The trust, he continued, is chaired by one person. He turned, faced the crowd. His voice softened. The only person who ever told me the truth, even when it burned. Emily's heart stopped. On the screen, her name appeared. Emily Rose Marshall, Director, Marshall Foundation for Recovery and Renewal. Gasps, murmurs. One man dropped his pen, and Alexander wasn't done. I married her because I thought she could save me from scandal. But she didn't. His voice cracked barely, but it cracked. She saved me from myself. A silence fell so deep it swallowed the room. Then he stepped out from behind the podium. Emily, he said, looking directly at her. I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm offering one. Not in penthouses or contracts, not in public. Just in truth. She stood slowly, the entire room turning to follow her every breath. She walked to the stage without speaking, climbed the steps, one at a time, and stopped 3 feet from him. He didn't reach for her. He waited. You broke me, she said. You made me a pawn. His throat moved, but he said nothing. But you also listened when I screamed without words, she continued. You heard me, and then you changed. Her voice was steady now, louder than it had ever been. I'm not your wife because a paper says so. I'm not your reputation rehab. I'm not your redemption arc. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the gold band he had placed on her finger months ago. Gasps rippled again. The room leaned in. She held it up. I'm your equal, she said, and if we ever wear these again, it will be because we both chose to. Then she turned to the microphone. This company belongs to the people it forgot, the ones who work in silence, the ones who heal in the dark. I was one of them. She looked out across the sea of stunned faces, and now I run it. Thunderous applause didn't follow. It was quieter, more stunned than celebratory. But the power in the room had shifted. Emily turned back to Alexander, her eyes unreadable. I'm not coming home to marble and chandeliers, she said. I'm coming home to something real. If you still want that. He stepped forward, reached for her hand, not to pull her close, but to kneel, the richest man in the room, on one knee before the girl behind the curtain. I don't want anything else, he said. Good, she whispered, placing the ring in his palm. Then earn it. And for the first time, it wasn't a deal. It was a beginning. Built not on lies, but on fire, and the truth that rose from its ashes. The day after the stockholder meeting, the world woke up different, and so did Emily Rose Marshall. The headlines no longer called her the scarred wife, the gold digger, or the coat girl who tricked a billionaire. Now they read, Emily Marshall takes control of $40 billion empire, plans to dismantle broken system. From pain to power, how one woman rewrote the rules of redemption. Alexander Drake Marshall kneels before former wife. What she did next silenced a room. But Emily wasn't reading headlines. She was in Brooklyn. Not in a tower, not in a limo, but standing in the middle of a half-constructed building where concrete dust clung to the sunlight and paint fumes danced like ghosts. This was her empire, now not built on glass and ego, but on steel and need. The first full-scale community recovery center was nearly complete. Burn survivors, domestic abuse victims, disfigured veterans, trauma patients no one wanted to look at. Here, they wouldn't just be seen, they would be rebuilt. Brick by brick. She walked the perimeter in boots, her sleeves rolled up, blueprints rolled under one arm. When the architects asked questions, she answered. When the contractors needed decisions, she made them, not with hesitation, not with permission. This was her world now, and she had earned it with every scar she once tried to hide. But power didn't come without ghosts, and hers returned on a Thursday morning. She was reviewing final inspections when one of her security team handed her a flash drive. No note, no explanation. Just 2 words on the file for her. She plugged it into her laptop, heart pounding as if it already knew something her mind hadn't caught up with. What appeared made her blood run cold. Video footage, surveillance, dated 5 months ago, 2 weeks before the gala. Inside the Marshall Tower boardroom. Alexander. And Clarissa. We need to neutralize your problem, Clarissa's voice said. Calm, chilling. The board doesn't trust your instincts anymore. Your image is slipping. Alexander's voice followed, quiet, bitter. Then what do you suggest? Clarissa smiled, leaning closer on screen. Find someone they'll pity, someone broken, someone scarred. The public loves a tragedy turned into a trophy. Emily couldn't breathe. On screen, Alexander didn't reply. He didn't object. He didn't defend her. He simply stared ahead, silent. The file ended. The screen went black. Emily sat frozen, fingers trembling over the keyboard. All this time, she thought he'd changed. She thought he'd loved her in the end. But this was before everything. Before the lie. Before the marriage. Before the night he claimed her in front of the world. She rose to her feet, numb, hollow. The silence. of the construction site pressing against her like the weight of stone. Clarissa had planted this. Of course she had. But the footage was real. The silence was real. And now, so was the doubt. That evening, Emily went to the only place that still made her feel small, the old church steps on 7th Avenue, where she used to sit after her shifts, counting quarters for her mother's medications, praying for anything to change. Alexander found her there. He didn't say anything at first. He sat beside her in the cold, not in a suit, not in designer shoes. Just a coat and silence. You knew about the footage? She asked finally. Double quotes. No. He said quietly. I remember that meeting. I didn't know it was recorded. But you didn't say anything. You didn't stop her. He stared ahead, jaw clenched. I didn't think it would matter. Emily laughed, bitter and broken. It mattered. He looked at her then. Really looked. I was wrong. That's not enough. He nodded slowly. I know. The streetlight above them buzzed. Wind tugged at Emily's coat. I trusted you, she said, her voice cracking. Not just with my image. With my truth. With everything. I know. So why didn't you stop her? He looked away, his voice almost too quiet to hear. Because part of me believed her. That silence stretched. And then she stood. I can't do this again, Alexander. Not if I have to doubt every memory. He stood to. But he didn't beg. He didn't explain. He just reached into his coat and pulled something out. A folded document. Not a contract. A resignation. Marshall Systems is yours now, he said. Entirely. I'm stepping down. She stared. Why? Because I don't deserve to lead what you've built. Not after what I allowed to happen. Not after the silence. What will you do? Start over. Somewhere else. Build something better. With nothing but what I've learned from you. Emily didn't answer. She took the paper. Read it. Folded it again. And walked away. This time, he didn't follow. But she didn't throw the resignation away either. 3 weeks later, the world exploded again. Not with scandal. But with a whisper. Emily. Marshall found visiting former husband at Children's Hospital. 2 leaders. 1 vision. Joint initiative launches for trauma therapy across 11 cities. Are they back together? No one had an answer, except to people. Emily and Alexander standing side by side, not as lovers. Not yet. But as equals. Partners. And maybe, someday, something more. But for now, they were building something not even fire could burn. Because the real love story wasn't about how it started. It was about how it survived. The sun had barely risen over New York when the doors to the Children's Trauma Hospital opened. And for the first time in months, Emily and Alexander walked through them together, not as husband and wife, not as CEO and figurehead, but as to people finally stripped of all titles, all contracts, all illusions. The air was thick with mourning, disinfectant and soft beeping monitors. Nurses whispered through the corridors like ghosts of healing. Emily moved ahead, clipboard in hand, speaking softly to a young burn survivor whose drawings now lined the hallway, bright colors and crooked smiles stitched over pain. Alexander followed silently behind, not as a shadow, but as a student. The walls of his world, once made of numbers, power, and steel, were now decorated with crayon and hope. They were launching the first joint recovery initiative, a fusion of Emily's community work and Alexander's infrastructure. 11 cities, mobile trauma clinics, art therapy programs, and grants for silent survivors. It was everything their fake marriage had never planned, and everything it had accidentally made possible. But even as the world celebrated, there were still cracks beneath the surface. Not in the mission. In the trust. After a long day of presentations, Emily stood by a window in her hotel room overlooking the city. Alexander sat across from her, reading reports. There's something I need to ask, she said, not turning. Anything. Did you love me back then? Her voice was quiet, not broken, simply real. Or was I just useful? He didn't look up, not at first. When he finally did, his eyes held something softer than she expected. The night of the gala, he said, when I called you my wife, it wasn't love. Not yet. But it wasn't strategy either. It was something in between. And the nights after that, he stood and walked toward her slowly, his footsteps silent over the rug. I didn't know how to name it, he said, because I'd never felt it before. Not like that. Not without control. She turned to him now, eyes meeting his. So it was real. It became real, he whispered. Somewhere between your silence and my lies. Somewhere between your fire and my fear. She didn't speak. So he did. You taught me how to stop building fortresses and start building bridges. She stepped closer. I wasn't the only one burning. No, he said. But you were the only one who didn't run from the smoke. For the first time since their story began, there were no walls between them, just the quiet aftermath of a war they both survived. He reached out not to claim her, but to offer her his hand. Not as a billionaire. Not as a husband. As a man. She took it. Not because she needed him, but because she did in single quotes T. And that changed everything. A week later, an anonymous tip landed in a reporter's inbox. A copy of the surveillance footage, the one showing Clarissa and Alexander in the boardroom planning Emily's role, before she'd ever entered the story. But something was different. This version had an extra minute. A full 60 seconds cut from the original version Emily had seen. The missing piece. In it, Alexander turned to Clarissa after her cold suggestion, jaw tight. I won't use someone like that, he said. We're not doing it. You'll lose the board, Clarissa snapped. Then let them walk. The reporter hesitated. They could run it. Or not. They chose not to. But they sent the full footage to Emily anonymously. No name, just a subject line. You didn't know the whole story. Emily watched the full clip in silence. And this time, when the screen went black, she smiled. Not because she'd been right, but because she'd been wrong, and he had still chosen her. Anyway. The next night, Alexander stood on the rooftop of the Marshall Foundation's headquarters as the board celebrated their national expansion, suits and champagne, laughter and polished speeches. But his eyes were scanning the skyline. Searching for her. Then the elevator dinged. Emily stepped out. No gown, no cameras, just jeans, boots, and wine-tossed hair. You weren't coming? He asked. I wasn't sure you still needed me here. He looked at her like she was the first star after a blackout. Always. She moved closer, stopped a breath away. What would you have done? She asked. If I never came back. His voice was barely audible. I would have built the world we dreamed of anyway. Because that's what love is, even if it's alone. Especially then. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the ring. His eyes widened. But she didn't give it back yet. No more contracts. No more secrets. No more performances. Just us. She placed the ring in his palm again. This time, you don't call me your wife to save me. He closed his fingers around it. This time, you call me your wife because you love me. He dropped to one knee, not out of tradition. But out of choice. Emily Rose Marshall, he said, voice steady in the wind. No headlines, no deals, no lies. Will you choose me again? She didn't speak. She kissed him instead. And for the first time, no one laughed. Because this time the richest man in the room had fallen to his knees for the strongest woman in it. The widow that had once laughed at Emily Rose Marshall now bowed before her. Snow fell quietly over Manhattan like the final credits of a film. The city never believed would end this way. There were no fireworks, no press conference, no headline. Louder than the silence between two people who had finally chosen love. Without the armor of spectacle. It had been exactly 1 year since the gala. Exactly 1 year since the girl in the handmade dress had been dragged into a room full of wolves and walked out with the richest man in the room claiming her as his wife. But now, the world no longer saw her as his wife. They saw her as something else. Something more dangerous. They saw her as herself. The Marshall Foundation had launched 20 centers in 12 months, trauma clinics, therapy programs, survivor scholarships, and silent outreach teams for abuse victims who had no one left. The Marshall name, once synonymous with profit, was now known for protection. And she ran it. Emily sat in the upper-level office of the new headquarters, windows facing the city like a throne of light. On her desk were 2 objects: the signed resignation letter from Alexander, never filed, and the original contract from their fake marriage, now torn in half and sealed in a frame labeled the beginning of the end. Her phone buzzed. Not with calls, not with media, just a text. It's time. She rose, crossed the polished floors of her private elevator, and descended to the auditorium below. What waited wasn't a press event or a shareholder summit. It was the final piece of the story they had promised to build together. Not for the cameras, for the survivors. She stepped onto the stage in front of a crowd of burn victims, orphan teenagers, disabled veterans, and young women from shelters who had never worn dresses that fit or eaten meals that weren't handed to them through glass. You all know who I was a year ago, Emily said, and most of you watched as the world made a spectacle out of my scars. She paused. Silence followed. They called me everything, a pity project, a fake wife, a gold digger. But they never called me what I really was. Someone whispered from the front row, "What were you?" She smiled gently. A survivor who finally stopped apologizing. Applause rose, not loud, but fierce. Every hand clapping had once been burned, broken, dismissed. Now they cheered for her, and for themselves. When she stepped off stage, Alexander waited in the wings, not in a suit, not in power, just in awe. "You didn't need me to become this," he whispered. "No," she agreed, "but I needed you to remind me it was possible." Later, that night, they walked through the city hand in hand, not to be seen, but to feel something real. The wind whipped around them, stealing their breath, but their silence was warm, steady, unshaken. And then, without warning, he stopped. They were standing in front of the Imperial Regency Hotel, the ballroom where it all began. The gala was being held again that night. Same location, same chandeliers, same glittering crowd. "Do you want to go in?" he asked. She stared at the grand entrance, the memory of laughter still faintly echoing in her ears. "No," she said softly. "I want to take back what they tried to steal." He looked at her, puzzled. "Not by returning," she clarified. "By rewriting." She pulled out two envelopes. Inside were invitations. "Emily Rose Marshall and Alexander Drake Marshall cordially invite you to the soft launch of the Rose Initiative, an annual gala, where survivors are the guests of honor, not donors, not billionaires, not socialites, just the ones who rebuilt themselves. This is how we close the story," she whispered. "Not by proving ourselves to the room that laughed, but by building a new room, a better one, from scratch." He took her hand. "Do we invite Clarissa?" he asked, half joking. "We already did." He blinked. Emily smiled. She sent a check, anonymously. 7 figures. Alexander laughed freely. Laughed, not the cold chuckle of his business days, a real, unguarded sound. "Then I suppose miracles do exist." "No," she said, "just change." The night of the Rose Initiative Gala arrived. It wasn't held at the Regency. It was held in Brooklyn, the converted warehouse where Emily used to teach children to paint, now transformed into a haven of light and color, every wall lined with art created by survivors. No red carpets, no gowns above $10,000, no photographers allowed. Just truth. Raw, bleeding, beautiful. At the center of it all stood Emily, wearing a gown that shimmered like midnight oil and carried no designer name. Her scar was fully visible, on purpose. Alexander stood beside her, not as her protector, not as her title, but as her choice. As midnight struck, she stepped onto the small stage again. "1 year ago," she said, "I was introduced to a crowd with mockery. Tonight, I introduce myself." She raised her glass. "My name is Emily Rose Marshall. I'm a survivor, a builder, a leader, and a woman who chose to believe in something better, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it." 1,000 candles flickered behind her. 1,000 lives reborn, 1,000 stories waiting to be told. And in that moment, the girl behind the curtain, the one everyone laughed at, became the reason the room finally learned how to listen.